All right, final panel of the day. So wrapping up the day, we're pleased to be able to hear from the proverbial horse's mouth, the folks actually doing this, installing the technology, deploying the apps, and we'll hear what they think about all of this. So moderating for us is Skip Pizzi over from the NAB, VP of Technology, Education, and Outreach. She's already been a bit vocal today. And on our panel, we have Michael Bouchard, the VP of Technology Strategy over at Sinclair One Media, Stacey Decker, the CTO of Public Media Group, and Sasha Javid, the COO of Spectra Consortium. I'll let you take it away, Skip.
All right, thanks. Chuck, yeah, there we go. Thank you very much. And thanks again to all of you for sticking around for a full, long day here. We'll try to wrap things up and get us over to the reception. Yeah, nothing like standing between you and beer. So this group here today, we did have one additional panelist who was expected who was not able to join us, but I think we have the industry well represented here, both from the commercial broadcasting side, the public media side, and perhaps the new business side of this industry that NextGen TV enables. And this is a kind of a historic time, 2020. This is the year that this is supposed to get started. And so this is perhaps some of the vanguard here, some of the folks who actually are already starting, certainly thinking about what they're going to be doing, making serious plans to start the deployment. And so I'd like to just start with a quick lightning round on what is one thing that out of probably many, but just pick one, that is the most exciting option that you think NextGen TV gives to the business. Michael, why don't we start with you guys? I know you've been thinking a lot about it.
For the business, it's really the future interoperability with other networks, opening up our private networks.
Yeah, I can't really hear you.
Is this not working? Oh, there we go.
Just needs to be louder.
So opening up our private TV networks. Can you hear me now? All right, great. The biggest thing that we're looking at for the business, now this is not short term, we're not going to do this in 2020, but it's opening up our platforms, our networks, our private TV networks for innovation by others. So that's something that we don't have today. When we talk about that will allow the real innovation, because the stuff that we can all think about, I keep saying this, it's all the intuitively obvious ideas, right? It's not the idea of, I don't know, someone that can't get a date in their Harvard dorm room, inventing Facebook, right? Those are the innovations that we, want to see.
So sort of like what makes a platform successful.
Yeah.
Is opening it up to the developers. What made Windows popular? What made the iPhone and other devices popular is that you've got this plethora of creatives that can now join the party.
Right, and that's something we're working on, through ATSC, but it's a multi-year. It's not something for 2020.
Right. Sure. Okay.
We got to get stations on the air.
But that is something really new. I mean, certainly not something like we really kind of never had in TV before.
It is, absolutely.
Right. Great. Thanks. Okay, Stacey, how about you? What are you thinking along the same lines there?
See if my mic works. Can you hear me? Okay. I'll give it back to you. I think we're just at an interesting time. We're in a position now where cloud, AI, ML, all these things are now available and operational that can actually utilize our infrastructure and make it better, and vice versa. Our infrastructure can start to play a role in bettering those environments. And so I think as we talk about 3.0 and single frequency networks and connecting all of that infrastructure, I just think about all the tools that we have now at our disposal to really empower that experience. And I think that we're just at a unique time in history with regard to technology and disruption. And that unique time is 100% to our benefit, because we've now got the opportunity to take the infrastructure that we've all known for years and deploy these things on top of it and really make it powerful.
So some cool synergies happening.
Smart cities, I mean, think about what smart cities mean for this country, right? People are educated better, their lives are better, communities are better. I just think that we've got a lot of really cool things coming, and I think our infrastructure really, if done properly, and I think if we were lucky enough to get it deployed, and we all have to work together to do that, I really think that's important as well. That a single frequency network in a community, or a number of single frequency networks, can change things drastically. So
being at the right place at the right time, hopefully.
It's 2020.
Right. Well, it sure would be an enabling technology that, again, our industry really hasn't been able to avail itself to. So this is perhaps the time to do it.
Feels like it.
So, Sasha, your side of the industry is looking at some of that wholly new kind of opportunity. What's most exciting about that to you?
Well, can everybody hear me?
You can.
Okay, great. For me, I'll take kind of a twofold approach of what's exciting. I think the announcements at CES and just the unveiling of the NextGen TV reveals to me that we're moving out of this conceptual stage and talking about what the value is to the consumer. On a personal level, it means that I'm going to get out of the cat herding business, which we've been doing for the past year, about getting broadcasters to sign up and push forward with ATSC. We're actually going to see deployments this year. It's happening. And for the Spectrum Co side of things, it's about tackling. Rick and Mark talked about that the next generation of data services that are going to be available. I think he had a $15 billion number by 2030, if I read that slide correctly. That's a big number to tackle, and we got to start now. And the rollout of ATSC 3.0 is going to enable Spectrum Co to have the platform to start to invite new application developers and target those verticals, which we think will bring us that $15 billion number we're looking for.
Right. So there again, this is year zero in a sense, so let's start the
I'd
clock.
like to say this is year one now.
Yeah.
Finally.
Well, okay. Yeah.
We've had a lot of year zeros. I think last year was year zero. The year before was zero. This is year one. We're going.
Well, and to the point made several times here today is like, why didn't we see more about it at CES? I think for CES, for the consumer electronics industry, it was year zero. And really, there are devices there that, as it's been shown, there are at least 20 models that actually were saying will have it when they ship, but the manufacturers themselves weren't really touting that. But when you're in a consumer environment, it makes sense because nobody knows what that is yet. That's also has been demonstrated. So it's an uphill climb, but it's an exciting one that starts here, right?
Yeah, and I would say that there is this chicken and egg problem. You don't want to push too hard on the consumer side if there isn't yet a product that they can use.
Exactly, sure.
So
right.
You have to be careful on the messaging. When you start today with the messaging, you have to be clear what it is. I was involved in the HD rollout back in the early 2000s. That's exactly what you shouldn't do in a rollout. They were saying now broadcasting in HD, and they never mentioned that you needed to get a new HD radio to get the actual HD radio reception. So everybody thought they were getting HD radio, and they missed out on all the benefits of it. So I think messaging, going back to what Madeline and others have said, I think is so critically important on the TV side, consumer side, broadcasters, etc. Everybody's got to work together to make this happen.
That said, we're being a bit outmarketed, right? 5G is just everywhere, and I agree 5G is great, but they're using our communications infrastructure to beat us at our own game. I don't see any marketing for NextGen television yet, and obviously, as you pointed out, you've got to be timely in that.
Right. Well, if there's nothing to sell yet, that's the thing. So we're really, again, not to be cliched, like the the Head and Shoulders quote that Lynn's mentioned earlier, but it's true that the longest journey starts with a single step, and so here we are making those first steps. But to that end, what are some of let's again pick one. What's the biggest obstacle you're facing, or that you think we need to focus on overcoming at this early stage? Start back to you, Michael.
Well, as far as, our first stations that we roll out, I agree wholeheartedly that it has to look good. We're planning on doing, 1080p with HDR. It has to look better than what, they're used to seeing. Internally, though, we have a different obstacle. It's really focus, because we're always acquiring something like, I don't know, RSNs from Walt Disney, right? And it's that distraction because we're always doing multiple things. There's never a quiet time to just roll out 200 stations.
Sure. At the station level, you still got to you still have the day-to-day. I mean, you still got the bread and butter business to keep going.
And the other thing, too, is, we're looking at this to transform the business, right? To come up with the next generation wireless platform for all of our broadcast, which is all, cloud native like everyone else. But it's all kind of mixed together.
Right. And we've seen this a lot already in the so-called new media world, or as broadcasters tried to manage the balance between the online side and the traditional on-air side. And so it's more of that, actually, but they've gotten pretty agile at doing that in those last few years with the web. So it's just yet another one of those balancing act challenges, I guess, going forward that a lot of broadcasters will be facing. So what do you think, Stacey, on challenges?
I've said this before. I think definitely the biggest challenge is that, well, the biggest fear for me, I would say, is that if the best thing that comes of this is better pictures and sound, we've failed. I think we've got to really push this technology and this capability and this opportunity to another level, and stop competing behind the lens with technology, working together. Listen, content, we can compete all day, but in order for this infrastructure to be really powerful, we have to work together.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sasha, challenge?
Yeah, in terms for me, as I'm looking out, in terms of what I've gone through the past year, I'd say I am concerned about, as we pass this first phase of transitions in the markets that we're launching this year, and we're hoping to have at least 2 by the NAB show. I'm concerned about the second and third wave of transition. So I'm going to make a plug for Spectrum Co. now. When we come knocking on your market and we say we want to transition the market, it's, we'll do a lot of the heavy lifting to help transition the market. What you don't want to have happen is you come in, you say you're going to join in a second or third wave, and then there's just that many less partners you can partner with to put your 1.0 signal on. There's going to be much more difficult configurations in terms of the encoders, what they're going to have to handle. I think it's in the industry's benefit to roll this out together. I think one of the advantages I think we're going to see in the first markets is that the broadcasters in those markets recognize that we need to have as many of the major networks represented as possible on this launch. So it's not just vaporware, and it's something that's credible, that everybody can, consumer turns it on. The early adopters, somebody showed the S-curve on the adoption. To get those early adopters, you have to give them something to look at. And so you want to have the major networks participating, and it's so critical as we come to as we roll out these markets, that you don't just say, okay, we're going to wait for the second phase and go with another partner. It's not good for the consumer. It's not good for you, because as we transition these markets, it's just much more flexible the more participants we have in each market.
Right. And momentum builds, obviously, with mass. There is another issue, too, is on the physics theme there. Any time you try to start a new trend or a new movement, you're overcoming inertia. So
Correct.
any kind of advantage that we can get that we're hit the ground running, already have some momentum behind us. I think one point that was made earlier that a light bulb for me was that whole idea that we already have so many smart TVs out there.
Correct.
These are devices that already have an IP connection and for lack of a better word, traditional TV connection, whether it's an antenna directly or through an MVPD set-top box. Except that to date, and we see that's a pretty good number of those are out there already. To date, though, it's been a binary choice, but they're just basically two inputs. You either are watching one, or one of the flixes, as Rick said, Ducey said earlier, or you're watching the other. This NextGen TV, the big change there, and maybe this is one way to portray it that may help people understand it, is for the first time you can actually mix the two together.
Sure.
And, very interesting, the only folks who can actually really take advantage of that are broadcasters, right? We're the only industry that can have a foot in both of those camps. So if you think about it that way, that's a pretty cool spot to be in, right?
Yeah, and to that point, on our first releases, we have a big advantage because each one of our news departments already has a digital department. We already have those digital assets that are available. Yeah. I don't want to say it's low-hanging fruit, but it's low-hanging fruit. Every one of them has a VOD for the weather that's updated, I don't know, a couple times a day.
Sure.
And so linking that into the broadcast app is literally just that. They're already there.
Right. You got, again, build on what's already there. There's a lot that you don't have to start from scratch here, and that's how you get the momentum that's already there and just kind of leverage it. So.
Yeah, we have plenty of competition. I mean, as you watch the recent award show, how many of the awards were given out to Netflix and Hulu and YouTube? Yeah. I mean, they're going to other places, and the one thing they don't have is broadcast infrastructure, and we do. And plus, we've got assets, as you pointed out, that we've collected and investments in that content that we've have collected for years. And so we've got a lot of good information, good content. We've got relationships with the communities that we are in, and I think we can exploit those, continue to exploit them, and continue to offer services that those industries aren't really interested in. And local. I think local is very important.
Right, and Hollywood's loving this, obviously, and the SMPTE community particularly is part of that we've never been producing more content, and it doesn't look like that's going to slow down any time.
Yeah, if you looked at some of the technology that was brought to CES, it's done in preparation and in attempt to speed up content creation. Sony had a whole thing where they've removed green screens, right? And it's all an attempt to speed up content creation.
Yeah, and now when you think about it, if we have this new platform that has these new functionalities like this interactivity, like this gamification, whatever you want to call it, that opens up yet a whole nother palette for creativity to flow. So we hope that, again, can start a synergy. So
agreed.
That's such and your point of maybe just completely new business opportunities, but again, it works best if there's a group.
Correct.
A community. It takes a village, right?
Yeah, I mean, just thinking again about the kind of higher bandwidth applications that some people have bandied about. In the beginning, you're gonna need quite a few stations to participate and actually volunteer to be a 3.0 station because, we're gonna be hosting a whole bunch of partners on that 3.0 stick. So how much additional excess capacity will there be for other applications? I can tell you from Spectrum Co's perspective, one really great thing that came out of the CES was as a result of some of these announcements, certain companies that we had talked to in the past or kind of, that are outside of the broadcast space and that I had known had bought evaluation kits from a bunch of different vendors, some of which are in this room, came back and talked to me and said, hey, we're starting to think about some new applications again. Could we, when is, for instance, our Dallas site, when is that site going to become available? Now, Spectrum Coast at the beginning is going to focus largely at the lower bandwidth, lower data rate applications, just because that's what we're going to have available at the very beginning. But you can't lose sight of the fact we have pristine low band spectrum that there's no more low-band spectrum available anywhere. And people are looking for, there's a 900 megahertz proceeding that's going on in the FCC to figure out how to make that available. We need to take advantage of this. Spectrum Co. needs to take advantage of this fact, and the broadcasters should recognize that they have this underutilized asset that can be made more effectively used for this new standard. And when somebody comes and talks to us, we would like to be able to give them a platform to go and test this in a real-world environment.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the other piece to that, we've seen through some of our engineering studies in single frequency networks and communities. I'll point out one market. The coverage area was about 4 million people. With the addition of a single frequency network, it goes up by 2 million people because of shadowing and terrain. So staying within the same DMA, those single frequency networks can add a lot of viewers, and that's a really important element to building out this infrastructure as well.
Well, and the other thing is, the other way to look at that same statistic is even if it doesn't add numbers, it adds penetration such that you can use an indoor antenna where you couldn't before.
That's correct.
So this just building audience the old-fashioned way, brute force more RF that SFNs and any OFDM system, and particularly 3.0 with all the error correction as well as the SFN possibility, can really bring the antenna thing back. I mean, a lot of reason why people probably had stopped using, or that we saw the antenna usage going down, it's kind of a pain to climb up on the roof or pay somebody to install an antenna up there. It doesn't look that great. It may even be against your community codes. I mean, everything's going against you there. And but people still hang Christmas lights and stuff, and that's a pain. And then you got to take them down too. Right now is like an issue, and yet they'll still do it if there's some value. I'm not sure what the value exactly is. It's for that. Whereas with TV, free stuff is a pretty good value proposition. But if you can get that with just sticking a nice little mohu leaf on your wall or something next to the TV or over by the window, why not? All the better. So on that SFN question, again, aggregation makes, it's a brand new thing. It would be a whole new cost center potentially for broadcasters. The idea of aggregating that you guys are thinking about, and also working with Osborne, who's been thinking about this for a while. We've been talking with them for a while. We worked with them on a transition guide that we published last year, and it's still available. We heard a little bit about that cooperation or agreement that you guys have. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Public Media Group is a public benefit corporation. Osborne is a shareholder in our company, but it's also co-owned by 31 public broadcasting stations. And Osborne does our engineering with regard to single frequency networks in the communities that we're actually planning to deploy. So it's a very strong relationship. It's a great relationship. I'm very lucky to get to work with the likes of Jeff and a few others, but I think we're attacking this in the right way. We're somewhat Switzerland. We're not taking sides. We're working with both public and private to deploy capital to build these systems out. One of the challenges stations have, and I get it, is money. And so we have fortunately gone out and raised a significant amount of money to deploy infrastructure specific to single frequency networks and communities, and I think it's starting to take off quite well.
So that's a pool of some capital there.
I mean, on the SFN front, I'd be remiss with Mark in the audience and One Media pushing. We have a live SFN site in Dallas, which is up and running, that we are doing testing with. It's it is what we hope will be foundational, along with what you guys are doing, to lay the groundwork for basically a sea change for the broadcasters in terms of moving to a different architecture and how they distribute their signal. But we have something that's up and running, and I think it's important. We're going to learn a lot through this process. One of the lessons that have come out, and we've now approached, the NAB actually has approached the FCC about, is, well, if you put an SFN at the edge of the network, if you're under the existing rules, you're limited in what you can do with that SFN. Even with directional antenna, you're going to still have leakage outside of the contour. So those kinds of issues are the things we're now discovering. Maybe we hadn't really thought it all the way through when we first did the rulemaking in 2017. This is why it's so important the work that you guys are doing and what One Media is doing with their SFN, because these are the kinds of discoveries we're going to learn as we move to this type of network. So we can go and work through the NAB to make these kinds of relatively minor changes to the rules that will help the industry dramatically.
And there are measurements being done in Dallas as we speak.
That is correct.
Yeah, I mean, you look back to the 80s when I remember cell phones, when you left your district or your area, you went into roaming, right? You started roaming. Right. And SFNs are very similar to that. And we resolved that. I think we can resolve this. Madeline's doing great work in trying to educate people, and the FCC is taking interest. I think they're going to agree with this, right? It's going to take time and we have to educate them, but the value proposition for single frequency networks and to create that SFN across the entire country so we can start to purpose build technology to take advantage of this infrastructure is so enticing. I can't imagine that they would say no.
Right, I can't either, and that's I think the position that NAB has taken in its comments on this. But the point is that those rules that we're trying to get amended really applied to a world of everybody was a single high power, high tower. Yep. That made sense at the time. And, you wanted to maximize potential markets capabilities. Now, though, we have a whole new thing to think about that never existed before. You couldn't really do that except in cases where there was terrain shielding. You're actually trying to fill a hole that didn't get really any coverage. And with a booster, now it's all of a sudden, wait, this can now be a whole new thing with an OFDM-based system. And it makes sense for them to say, take a look at it. And really, the harms that would occur from this rule change are minimal, and the benefits are great. So I think it is kind of a no-brainer.
And this is also where it comes, where the industry has to work together.
Yeah, clearly. And speaking of that, the industry's in some ways pretty well poised with having kind of critical mass groupings. Sinclair, of course, #1 in that respect. Is that, how do you guys think about it in terms of your market priorities? Obviously you want to go with the biggest markets first, but how do you work with the other folks in the market on something like this?
Well, we've actually held back on some deployments to work with others.
Yeah.
We think it's very important. We think it's more important to wait a few months and roll out an entire market versus take one of our duopolies and just roll that out ahead of time.
Right. So that really kind of gets us into one of the other challenges that we have in this country, say, for example, compared to Korea, even though we're using the same system. And it was pointed out earlier that there's a mandate, there's new spectrum, we have neither. It's all us and, well, both sides of the industry to actually work together to do this. Now, that's great. It's flexible. We control our own destiny, as they say in sports, but the fact is that you still have to get it done. So, and the transition itself with no new spectrum is an interesting additional challenge that, and I know from talking to folks around the world, they're all looking at this because they're all facing similar broadcasters in those markets are also, whatever next gen thing they do or whatever growth they have, they face the same struggle. Wireless, taking more and more of the spectrum away. Not so any kind of new service, they end up having to think about watching this idea happen that we have for channel sharing. Open it up to the panel for what thoughts they have on the transition. We kind of understand a little bit, I guess, maybe not everybody in the room, but how that is going to roll out in terms of the lighthouse and channel sharing ideas. But any recent new thoughts on that, Sasha?
Again, what we spent the past year on it, is working through a lot of those issues. A lot of it isn't actually technical. A lot of it actually is on the business and legal side. Mm-hmm. The good news, channel sharing, the concept was actually introduced during the incentive auction, so we do have precedent about how it could work. Now, there is still other challenges that ATSC brings about, but what we wanted to do as much as possible, even at the cost of a little bit of a delay in terms of rollout this year, was standardize as much as possible the templates, or the legal templates, the business arrangements between the different broadcast groups, so that we're not reinventing the wheel in every market that we go and do this in. So in the first markets and the first broadcaster groups, we work closely both with NAB as well as with Pearl and with each of the different station groups that were in those first markets to standardize the hosting agreements, the engineering side, the connectivity matrices that are going to be needed for the planning, and even things like network approvals. That was one of the long polls this year that we had to get through. We had to walk through the networks to what we're asking for and be clear on how we're going to roll this out. So there's a little bit of hand holding we had to do there, but I think we've crossed a lot of those thresholds, and this is why I'm confident that this is year one and not year zero again.
I read an article recently. Bob Iger from Disney said that he was asked about broadcast television. And he said he doesn't have the confidence that broadcasters can actually get out of their own way and be successful. And honestly, that's probably my biggest concern, right? In that if we can actually, and I'm going to use the word ego, there's a lot of legal and financial reasons why we compete the way we do and why we act the way we do. But honestly, I feel very, very strongly that broadcasting, if we can come together as a system, is going to be incredibly, incredibly successful in this. And so I look across the room and ask everybody to start thinking differently about what we do, because that's the way to success for us. I think these deployment schedules and stuff are all going to become a lot easier if we have a role in that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was doing a 3.0 talk at Streaming Media West because I come from the digital side, and I've always talked at that on the OTT side. And there was a panel it was CDN folks. They had Akamai, they had Limelight, and they had, I think it was the CTO from Comcast, and someone asked a question about ATSC 3.0, and the CTO from Comcast said, well, there's two groups, there's Pearl and there's this other group, I don't know who that other group is, and they're doing everything different, so I don't even know if it's going to work. That was literally the answer, and that was like 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And so, I'm sitting in the audience thinking, oh, it's going to work.
Hold my beer.
And hold my beer.
Yeah, exactly.
But there is a perception out there.
Well,
and we're working hard to make sure that everyone knows that the industry is working together.
right. And
That's good.
it is a challenge, and we know that all the time in NAB, being the sort of one sort of place that where the industry is represented, it is a disparate group. I mean, in like 3 dimensions for us: radio versus TV, large market versus small market, and network versus stations. It's hard to get all those 3 dimensions, axes, to align around a single thought process when you're trying to make a point. But it's important to do so. Now, the other side of it is one of the great strengths of the industry is its diversity, and it's the fact that it's made up of a lot of individual markets and so forth, and a lot of individual players. But at certain times, it's great if we could all act like we were like a single platform, because a lot of the competition is that. Netflix, it's one operation, but it's everywhere. I mean, literally everywhere, and globally now. And that is, that's tough to compete with when you are a bunch of independents, unless you work together. So let's go to the phones. Got some questions here.
We're not as independent as you'd think, Skip. The consolidation that has occurred in the television broadcast industry has affected many of us. And I think maybe the panel and you can think, do you really think I work for Nexstar, full disclosure, I'm up from Richmond. Do you really think the folks here at Nexstar in Richmond have anything to say about what we get our marching orders from Dallas on engineering things? We're doing our repack soon. We're not even involved at the station level. The contractors are coming in. I was a bit taken aback, but I understood. But the idea is that now that companies like Media General, Raycom, and Tribune, I just picked three. I'll use Richmond as an example. There's four companies that own the 5 commercial TV stations in Richmond. Three of these companies weren't operating in Richmond about 3 years ago. Mine, they bought the Media General property. Scripps bought the CBS affiliate because Nexstar couldn't keep it when Tribune went away. Nexstar decided to keep us instead. And Gray bought the Raycom properties. With this huge consolidation going on, you got more centralized thinking at the top of these companies. Is that going to help the cause or not? Because I really don't see where at the station level we got a dog in the fight. It's what Dallas tells us to do.
Well, yeah, certainly there has been consolidation. That's clear, and that trend isn't going to go away either. But the point is that it's still not by any means as unified as any, I think, of the competition is. It's not as diverse as it used to be either, but it's certainly something where, in this case, something as heavy a lift as this really does require uniformity. And although we said this group up on the panel here is or among the folks leading the way, they're by no means the only ones, and I'm sure even elsewhere in the audience here we have folks who are thinking along the same lines or maybe along slightly different lines. This next-gen thing is so broadly capable. There are a lot of different ways that this could work to benefit multiple parties. So I encourage any folks who are already thinking about this and want to share what their thoughts are to grab a microphone and tell us, or if you have questions or comments in general.
So along those lines,
Yeah.
we've had a station in Richmond for years. So anyway, our Fox station. But I think the economy of scale of having that single platform where our stations can share content just like they do on the digital side, where, this thing's run cloud native. So if we have an event like we had in New Bern, 2 years ago when it flooded and there was 2 feet of water in master control in New Bern, keeping those things on the air, there's huge benefits. While they were, all running home to, take care of their houses and make sure that the pets weren't drowning, JLA or someone could cover a newscast, or Como in Seattle or something like that. And I think there's huge advantages.
You raise a good point, and that is that I think I've been an advocate of this for a long time. A little services business that I started to standardize the way we do things and utilize equipment that maybe we all might start to take advantage of. There's a lot of reason for that. I think there's a statistics that I heard at CES last week. For every 5 RF people that leave media, 1 comes in. That's a horrible statistic.
Wow.
Now we have an education problem. I think there's new technology that we're going to have to educate people to use in this industry, and so standardization for us is a massive, massive problem, and we have to all get on board with that.
And I'll just chime in on the consolidation side. I mean, I said we've been herding cats for the past year. Well, it's 8 or 9 cats generally that we have to herd. Imagine if you had to herd 14 or 15 cats that are different cats in every market. I mean, what a nightmare that would be.
Exactly. But
and I see both. I see the other side of it as well. But I think if we want to do the rollout, we're not competing against just each other anymore. We're competing against the Amazons, the Googles, the Facebooks of the world. They operate on the Verizons and T-Mobiles of the world. They as you saw during the DTV transition, during the incentive auction, they showed up with a lot of money. They operate on a different scale than we do, and we have to start to think that if that's our competition, we have to do what's in the best of the whole industry.
That said, I love Josh's presentation, and I believe the architecture is perfect. I think edge data centers is where we need to be. I think control technology to take advantage of that stuff, machine learning. That's all stuff.
And we're building those. Those edges are called our stations and our transmitters.
Right, but the aggregation of capital too is important, especially at the front end for the initial investment. So we have go ahead. Okay, great.
Some of the networks have basically said, they've made no bones about it, they believe their future is in OTT and in streaming. how do you think the rollout of ATSC 3.0 is going to impact the relationship between networks and their affiliates?
Good question, Tom. Go ahead. Anyone want to take that?
I mean, I can't speak for any individual broadcast group because we try to stay a little bit of arm's length in the individual negotiations. You know, I think to a certain extent there's a little bit of a wait and see approach. Now, the ones that have the O&Os, their O&O groups are already pushing the networks along this path, so it's a little bit easier. But there's still a little bit on the network side, you know, a little bit of wait and see. You know, maybe we'll give you a trial period to get this going. I think we've crossed a lot of those thresholds. I think a lot of the good work that the O&Os have done have helped push that along. But you know, it's an open question about how the relationship between the affiliates and the networks are going to evolve as this mobile rights. You know, we talk about mobile rights. ATSC can carry mobile. Clearly, that's, we feel, the most efficient way to do mobile. But it could also go over the OTT platform as well via mobile. It's just much less efficient. So working through those mobile rights is something that has kind of been raised and kind of punted to a final decision on. But I think we have to make the argument by rolling out these deployments and showing just how much more efficient our architecture is, that this is the best way to get your mobile broadcasts, and the OTT will fall under its own weight, when you try to do stream to every single mobile device that's out there.
Ideally, though, the consumer won't know, right? That's the idea behind this whole thing, is that if we get sets in their homes with ATSC3 capabilities, they won't know if it's coming OTT or if it's coming ATSC3. Well, that's the idea, in my opinion.
And isn't digital OTA just OTT over OTA? That's the way we're looking at it. A lot of TLAs, I know, I'm sorry.
That's fair.
But also, along those lines, it's no secret, our biggest concentration is in hyperlocal stuff, whether it's news or sports.
Yeah, if we do this, I'm sorry.
That's not necessarily a network thing.
Yeah, if we do this right and we build the technology right, we'll use the proper deployment capability for the content, and you can call it whatever you want, right? But it may be OTT. It's an app.
Even the transition too, that we know some affiliate agreements are being adjusted just in terms of where you're going to have to put some more stuff on the 1.0 Lighthouse, those bit rate requirements. Encoders have gotten better. So we're seeing some revisions there. So I think there's some flexibility to understanding this, but it is it's a learning curve for everybody, both the networks and the affiliates. But it is a really good point that Tom brings up, is that that's yet one other area that has to evolve or adapt. Yeah, next question.
With the repack, our market, for one, and I think quite a few others, have been pushed together enough that we will really have to work together, because we have an 8 and 9, we have a 14, 15, 17, 18, and 19. If you put an SFN up with half those on it, it's trouble.
Multiple SFNs.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, they all need to be in the same spot, really. They should work together, co-locate, share all the costs at the same time, and they can even share the same data feed and everything else.
Yeah, well, there's great efficiency in doing that anyway, but in your case, you're sort of forced into that, but that's actually good. Yeah, Eric?
I feel like I want to continue to push the question about the consumer side. First, just pointing out that the companies that are selling 5G now are selling vaporware. So I think we're all aware of that, and there's nothing wrong with ATSC 3.0 being pushed well in advance, because I agree you don't want to roll something out and not have anything for people to watch, but it does nothing wrong with saying it's coming. Are you aware of this? Because consumers are bombarded constantly with the new thing coming up. And the marketing around 5G is disgusting, if you ask me. I mean, it's really not realistic at all.
Well, of course, but what is 5G anyway? That's the other.
Well, that's
thing.
part of it. I mean, it's buzzwords. So, but then I also had a sort of a business question, which is odd because it's not something that I worry too much about. But it occurs to me that the over the air, what we're selling now, right, is supposed to be free. It always was free. It's free. Isn't this wonderful? What you pay is having to watch ads. Now, there's a lot of people now who are getting used to not watching ads, and they're willing to pay their $100 a year to Amazon or whatever it is to watch things without ads. And now that the ATSC 3.0 includes the internet connection, I assume that people are thinking, you know, we could start also charging for the over-the-air content. And I'm wondering if that's in the back of the minds, lay it out for free, but then eventually say, well, you know, if you want to get a membership for X amounts of money, you can now watch this without ads. Is that in the mix somewhere?
I don't think that necessarily is in the mix. You might have something like, you know, in Seattle, we're putting our free ABC over the air, of course, but we might have, you know, Tennis Channel on another service for people that have that subscription.
I'd say again, though, I think if we think better pictures and sound is the result of ATSC3, we've failed. Because I think the additional revenue streams are going to come in agricultural communities, in healthcare, in education,
Energy grid management.
energy grid, utilities. There's so many things I think that we can find other ways to create revenue. That while I do think the advertising industry is going to change around 3.0, I just think there's so much more opportunity in the additional things that the problems that we can solve with 3.0 that aren't necessarily being educated. I have been really lucky in this position to get to speak with universities and different manufacturing environments, and most of them haven't even heard of 3.0. They've heard of 5G, but they haven't heard of 3.0. That's a problem.
It might be. I mean, we've heard some broadcasters talk about this, where you have your traditional over-the-air signal that's going to be made, but then maybe the one that's catering towards, you know, with the mod card that caters towards mobile, maybe that's a subscription service. Those are the kinds of things we're thinking about.
Right. That's, I think, on the other hand, too, one other point that differentiate what we're talking about here with the 5G model is that in the 5G case, the telco operator basically controls the entire ecosystem, and they can market to sell handsets because you're getting the handsets from them, and they also have the service. Whereas we are, again, a diversified industry where we're trying to work in cooperation and be coordinated, but it is a much larger ecosystem of multiple players between CE devices that people buy, services that feed those devices that other operators, you know, so that whole thing makes it we have to be a little more careful with what we promise versus what we deliver. But yeah, but you do, I think the contrast is pretty important. Yes, Emily?
Yeah, so completely agree with what the panel is talking about beyond watching TV and all the capabilities there. Coming back to watch TV, because I think that's always going to be at least some part of what we do. And coming back to the question about the networks, are you seeing that the content producers, whether they be the network or whether they be the big studios or, for example, the big sports leagues, I think NFL rights are coming up at some point in the relatively near future. Do you think that those players are going to be pushing this platform? Because if the major studios and the major sports leagues say, yeah, 4K or you're out, and suddenly broadcasters are, yeah, we'll do 4K, sure. I mean, do you see that as a trend or anything that's coming down the pike, or do you see that not really pushing this platform? Thanks.
I honestly don't see us utilizing all our spectrum for 4K. It comes back to the old adage, when we went from SD to HD, the Honda dealer didn't give us an extra $1 for the ads. So HD to UHD, they're still not going to give us an extra $1 for an ad. Now, they'll pay a higher CPM if we could do a better targeted ad with some trajectory information coming back, but not just for a prettier ad. That's the way we look at it.
Yeah, it's curious because I've had a relationship with Sony for quite a long time, and you know that they're very focused on 4K and 8K and better, prettier, and it's beautiful stuff. But as to whether or not we're going to be forced to a place to carry that stuff over the air, that's a good question.
Now, I think where it comes in is, something Sinclair is going to do is the SHVC. So think about when we talk about mobile first, it might be, on a mobile mod card at, 480p with levels that you can get, maybe one over the air and maybe others over the internet.
Yeah, and the other point to Madeline's question specifically about, say, like a sports negotiation, a league rights renegotiation, as OTT eyeballs continue to grow, and they have a built-in agility to do those higher resolutions and so forth, that puts broadcasters in an increasingly difficult position to be able to say, oh yeah, we can beat that game. We've already seen limited things with Verizon and Amazon getting, occasional, a couple of little pieces of the NFL action, for example.
But you also got to remember that, supposedly 50% of Americans are underserved.
Right.
I was going to
So-
say that then you
Right.
come down to connectivity and cable systems
Right.
that have to adapt.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So,
What would
there's
the
a
cable
lot of
system
pieces
say?
in that, but it's something to think about.
So,
Oh yeah. Doesn't work either.
Need a single frequency network.
Yeah.
that one work now? Okay. I know every time we think about this, and I'm kind of looking to the network, the large groups, retrans, MVPDs.
Yes.
Are you guys really ready to break that model? And how do you think about that? Because we saw it
To
this
break that
morning.
model? No.
Well, but there's going to be some breaking of that model when you have a service that provides these other services over the air. When you look at the revenue model you have right now, right, which we were saying basically 50-50.
50%. Yeah.
Yeah, that seems to be a big headwind that we didn't talk about at all. So I'm really curious about your thinking of that.
Everyone's definitely thinking about that. But it comes down to, with these new opportunities and these new data transmission opportunities, it's going to be done in a careful manner to address that. So, the concept is if there is an additional, 20 billion to be made on data, when our entire local TV industry is 20 million. That makes up for the MVPD retransition. But this is not a lot smarter people are going to have to think about that besides me.
I would say that definitely has factored into some of this little bit of slowness in the last year, let's say, in terms of the going full on, in terms of making the switch to 3.0. I think some of them have gotten over this. I think Madeline's perspective is right. You got to start planning today for the future that is going to exist, even though right now you still want to take advantage of the revenue that you have coming in, but you can't wait for that to die, whatever year time frame that is, and then say, oh shit, I have nothing to go for. You have to start planning for it today, because that's the only way you're going to be ready to capitalize on this new technology, if you start the planning and the rollout today.
I think with that, we have to start thinking about systems as well, right?
Yeah.
You look at rights management. That in itself is something that's going to have to be completely revamped. It's not going to be two people sitting across the desk from each other talking about rights. It just doesn't. It can't work that way.
Yeah.
Right, and going back to the BIA slides earlier, that retrans component wasn't going down a lot in their charts. Now, like Rick said, 6 months from now that may be wrong, but the fact is they had a very robust continuation of that, which if it's true, I think, and we are talking right now with ATSC, that is, with the cable industry, in terms of how they can actually leverage the services and grow as well. So it could be a rising tide raises all boats there. It's not necessarily a zero-sum game, so we'll see. Is there one final question? Mark?
No, it's not really a question. To perhaps fill in an answer for Jim on this question. Look at content is king. Having a platform, is a great thing, and putting the two of them together can put you in the catbird seat. The reason that you have a Spectrum Co. and you have large collections of groups like Pearl coming together is in fact the ability to going back to the BIA. An advertiser wants an audience, and he wants more than male, female, what age. But they want it on a large market basis, meaning not just Baltimore, not just Washington, but some 50% or more. With an ownership cap, you can't do that singly. Broadcasters understand that. The way you do that is you put together market audiences that exceed the expectations of the advertisers, number one. You make it easy for them to sell into that platform, right? To sell their product, our audience. The fact, Sasha said he's only having heard about 8 cats now, and they're all, in every market as opposed to 14 different cats in every other market. That is the nature of an industry maturing, becoming competitive, and beginning to line up those cats, so to speak, to go after larger markets. But at the same time, don't underestimate the revealed value of content. And local broadcasters have that content. Sinclair, I can speak for us. We've certainly made plays beyond local, which is sports. Could you imagine the day where sports is only available over the air, or sports, sports on a mobile basis is only available on a phone, offered by broadcasters? So, think differently, and suddenly the possibilities are there. And we're not talking about, a gazillion dollars to make this happen. We're talking tens of millions, hundreds of millions, in terms of infrastructure and so forth, but we're not talking gazillion dollars. So Spectrum Co., Pearl, bring them together, integrate that in the cloud environment where you can sell across all stations that are part of this network, right? This is, you free up some capacity in every market that allows the sale of bits, and you get to configure those bits. If you want mobile bits, we'll sell you mobile bits. If you want, HD bits, we'll sell you HD bits. What's the service you want? And it requires investment, yes. It's more easily done on a shared basis, yes. But what resonates in my mind, is a statement that was made almost 5 years ago by Perry Sook at a TV 2020. It wasn't 2020 at TV New York, and he said, it's all about creating value from our underutilized asset, and that asset is spectrum. And so our business is, in fact, a spectrum-based business, and we got to get going.
Don't forget that tens of millions, Public Media Group has gone out to raise a lot of money to assist in the infrastructure. And I think what these guys are doing is fabulous. We're held separately entirely from from that approach, but we're out here to really influence broadcasters to invest in that technology. And if you don't have the money, we've raised money to do that.
Thanks, Mark. That was a really nice way to wrap things up, I think, because we are rapidly approaching an open bar. So I think we should thank our panelists, Sasha, Stacey, Michael, and all of you for sticking around. Thanks so much to SMPTE and SBE, Peter and Fred, and to WIDA for hosting this great event here today. Thank you all. And I'll hand it back over to Peter for some closing comments. Thanks.
Yes, it really cannot be overstated the amount of blood, sweat, and tears that Peter and Fred put into this.
Yeah.
So,
thank you all. Thank you. you know, but it didn't really happen, you know, until Brian Markwalder showed up and the monitor started behaving. It was that's really made it all work out right. So thank you guys. Thank you all for coming, and gals. It's great to have you here. We'll do it again soon. Yes.
For hosting us.
Oh, and I will try to get the slides published for you on the SMPTE website and send you all an email. And then we also have been recording this, and we will at some point post the videos as well. So thank you all. That was great.
Yes, Busboys and Poets, 4251 Campbell. If you go out the building, head down the street, away from the highway, turn right, it'll be on your right. Ah, there you go.